There are stories buried in American history that were never meant to be told. Not because they were forgotten, but because the people who knew the truth made sure it stayed hidden. No records, no public memory, no official acknowledgement, just silence. And sometimes silence is the loudest warning of all. In the spring of 1834, in the quiet farmland of central Virginia, something was uncovered that shattered the illusion of safety in a close-knit rural world. 47 children. Hidden beneath an ordinary farmhouse. Chained, starving, alive but barely. They came from different places, different families, different lives. They didn't look alike, they didn't speak the same way. But when authorities tried to question them, every single one gave the same answer, a single name. Mother Sullivan. At first, the name sounded harmless, almost comforting. But what investigators would soon realize was that nothing about this situation was normal. And nothing about the woman they called Mother was what it seemed. The case would go on to become one of the most disturbing hidden crimes of early American history, not just because of what was discovered, but because of how long it had gone unnoticed. To understand how something like this could happen, you have to step back to a time when communities were smaller, trust was automatic, and questioning your neighbors was something people simply didn't do. The area was known as Millbrook, a rural settlement made up of scattered farms, dirt roads, and families who had known each other for generations. Life there followed a predictable rhythm. Work at sunrise, trade at the general store, church on Sundays, and quiet evenings that ended long before night fully settled in. Everyone knew everyone, or at least they believed they did. On the far edge of that community sat the Sullivan property, a modest farmhouse surrounded by open land. Nothing about it stood out. White wooden walls, wide porch, a red barn set back behind the house. To anyone passing by, it looked like any other farm. And that was the first reason no one suspected anything. Because evil rarely announces itself. It blends in, it adapts, it looks ordinary. The land had been purchased years earlier by a man named Ezra Sullivan, a quiet figure, not particularly social, but not suspicious either. His wife, Constance Sullivan, was better known in the community, soft-spoken, polite, deeply religious. She attended church when she could, spoke gently, and carried herself in a way that made people trust her without question. If anyone had been asked to describe her at the time, they would have said the same thing. Kind, respectable, private, and that image was carefully maintained. Whenever questions came up, and occasionally they did, Constance always had an answer ready. She told neighbors that she and her husband were caring for orphaned children, relatives, distant family connections. Children who had nowhere else to go. It sounded believable. In fact, it sounded admirable. In a time when illness, poverty, and death often left children without families, taking in orphans was seen as an act of compassion. And that explanation became the shield that protected everything. People would sometimes notice things, small details, a glimpse of a child in a wagon, extra supplies being purchased at the store, lights on late at night. But each time the explanation made sense. They're shy. They've been through a lot. They need time. And that was enough, because people don't question what they want to believe. The local shopkeeper noticed the food orders were unusually large. Flour, salted meat, cornmeal, enough to feed far more than 2 adults. But Constance would smile gently and remind him about the children. The doctor in the area was occasionally called to the farm, but never allowed to examine the patients directly, always given descriptions instead. Always told the children were frightened, too fragile to see strangers, and even that was accepted, because nothing about the Sullivan household ever crossed the line into obvious suspicion. It stayed just within the boundaries of what people were willing to ignore. That's how systems like this survive, not by hiding completely, but by appearing just normal enough. For For over 20 years, that illusion held. 20 years of silence. 20 years of deception. 20 years of something happening beneath the surface that no one chose to see. Until one winter, everything began to change. It started quietly, like most turning points do. A storm, a traveler, and a single night that didn't feel right. The first crack in the illusion didn't come from suspicion. It came from circumstance, something no one could control. A winter storm. In February of 1834, Virginia was hit with one of the harshest cold spells in years. Temperatures dropped fast, roads became difficult to travel, and anyone caught outside after dark was taking a real risk. That's where the story shifts, because on one of those nights a traveler lost his way. His name was Jacob Stern, a merchant moving between towns, used to long journeys, used to handling rough conditions, but that night the storm changed everything. The wind picked up, visibility dropped, and within minutes he realized he wasn't going to make it to the next town. He needed shelter immediately. Through the snow he saw a light, a farmhouse, the Sullivan property. He approached carefully, knocked, waited, the door opened, and there she was, Constance Sullivan, calm, composed, exactly as the community knew her. She didn't hesitate, didn't question him. She invited him inside. At first everything felt normal. A simple meal, warmth from the fire, a place to rest. But something didn't sit right. It wasn't anything obvious. It was the atmosphere. The way the house felt, quiet but not peaceful, controlled. Jacob noticed the way Constance and Ezra looked at each other. Small glances, unspoken communication, as if they were constantly aware of something else, something unseen. When he asked about the children, Constance gave the same explanation everyone had heard before. They're resting. They've been ill. They shouldn't be disturbed. Her tone was gentle, convincing, but Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that something was being avoided. That night he lay awake longer than expected. Listening, at first there was nothing, just the sound of wind against the house. Then something else, faint, almost impossible to place. A sound beneath him, not loud, not clear, but unmistakable, crying, soft, muffled, like it was coming from somewhere it shouldn't. Jacob sat up, listening carefully. It came again, a weak sound, then silence. He waited. Nothing. The next morning he mentioned it, carefully, trying not to sound accusatory. Ezra dismissed it immediately. The wind, he said. Old houses make noise. And that was it, no concern, no curiosity, just dismissal. Jacob didn't push further, he left, but something stayed with him. Because sometimes your instincts recognize something before your mind can explain it. And that feeling didn't go away. 3 weeks later, something else happened, something far more serious. A young girl disappeared. Her name was Mary Catherine Flynn, an immigrant traveling with her family. They had been heading toward work opportunities, hoping to build a better life. But during a river crossing, she became separated, lost, alone, and by nightfall she found herself at the same place Jacob Stern had, the Sullivan farm. Once again the door opened. Once again she was taken in. And that was the last time anyone saw her alive. Her family searched, neighbors helped. A report was filed, but nothing was found, no trace, no sign. And eventually the search ended. People assumed the worst. Exposure wild animals, because in a world like that, those explanations made sense. But there was one problem. Mary Catherine had reached shelter, and no one ever questioned what happened after that. Then came the moment that changed everything. A local farmer, William Hutchinson, was out hunting near the Sullivan property. It was a quiet afternoon, nothing unusual, until he heard something. A scream, not playful, not distant, raw, desperate. He froze, because this wasn't normal. This wasn't children at play, this was fear. He moved closer, carefully, staying hidden, watching, and what he noticed didn't make sense. The sound wasn't coming from inside the house, it was coming from beneath it. That realization changed everything. Because houses don't hide sounds like that unless something is hidden inside them. Hutchinson stayed there for nearly an hour, listening. The screams came and went, weak, broken, and then he saw Ezra Sullivan emerging from a side entrance. Not the front door, something lower, something concealed. Ezra looked around, careful, then disappeared again, back underground. That was the moment Hutchinson knew this wasn't something he could ignore, because now it wasn't a feeling, it was evidence. And once you see something like that, you don't forget it, you act. William Hutchinson didn't wait. He didn't go home, didn't sleep on it, didn't try to convince himself he had misunderstood, because what he heard wasn't something you ignore. He went straight into town, found the sheriff, and told him everything. Sheriff Elias Turner had been in Millbrook for nearly 15 years. He wasn't easily alarmed. He had seen disputes, theft, occasional violence, but nothing like this. Still, he listened, carefully, because Hutchinson wasn't the kind of man to exaggerate, and the details didn't sound like imagination. At first, Turner tried to approach it logically. There could be explanations: storage space, livestock shelter, even something as simple as echoing sound from the wind. But there were two things he couldn't ignore: the screaming and the hidden entrance. That combination didn't belong in any normal situation, so he made a decision, quietly, without alerting the community. He would go to the Sullivan property himself, not with a large group, not with noise, just enough presence to observe, to confirm. The next morning, he rode out with two men, Deputy Harris and a local volunteer. The approach was calm, controlled. Nothing about it suggested confrontation. From a distance, the farmhouse looked exactly as it always had. Still ordinary. That was the unsettling part, because nothing about the outside reflected what might be happening beneath it. Turner dismounted, walked to the front door, knocked. Constance opened it. And for a moment nothing seemed wrong. She greeted them politely, as she always did. But Turner noticed something immediately, a delay, just a fraction of a second, but enough. Enough to suggest she wasn't surprised, as if she had expected this moment. "Sheriff," she said calmly, "what brings you here?" Turner kept his tone even. "Just checking in," he replied. "Had a report of unusual sounds in the area." Constance smiled slightly. "The wind has been strong lately," she said. "Old houses carry noise in strange ways." It was the same explanation Jacob had received, rehearsed. Turner nodded. "Mind if we take a look around?" he asked. There was another pause, short, measured. Then she stepped aside. "Of course," she said. That was the second warning, because people with nothing to hide don't pause before saying yes. They entered the house. Everything inside was orderly, clean, controlled, nothing out of place. Turner moved slowly, observing, listening. The others followed. They checked the main rooms, the kitchen, the storage areas. Nothing unusual, at least not at first. Then they heard it, faint, just like Hutchinson described. A sound beneath their feet, not loud, but there. Unmistakable. Turner stopped, raised his hand slightly, silencing the others. They listened. And then it came again, a cry, weak, strained, but real. Turner looked at the floor, then at Constance. Her expression hadn't changed. That was the third warning, because she didn't react, not to the sound, not to their reaction, nothing. "Where is that coming from?" Turner asked. His tone still controlled, but sharper now. Constance didn't answer immediately. Then quietly, "I don't hear anything," she said. That was enough. Turner stepped forward, scanning the floor, looking for anything out of place, any sign of a hidden entrance. At first, nothing, then a detail, a slight seam in the wood, subtle but intentional. He moved toward it, knelt down, ran his hand across the surface, and felt it, a shift, not solid, not fixed. He stood up slowly, looked at the others, then back at Constance. "What's under here?" he asked. Silence. Not hesitation this time, stillness, because now the moment had arrived. Constance didn't step forward, didn't explain, didn't deny. She just watched, and that was the final confirmation. Turner nodded to Harris. "Open it," he said. Harris hesitated for a second, then moved, pressed against the panel. Nothing, then found the edge, applied pressure, and the floor shifted slowly, revealing darkness beneath. Cold air rose up, and with it something else. The sound, clear now, no longer faint. Voices, many of them, weak, desperate, alive. Turner didn't wait. He stepped forward and looked down. And in that moment, everything changed. Turner didn't speak. For a moment, he couldn't, because what he saw didn't fit into anything familiar. The space below wasn't small. It stretched further than expected, reinforced, built, not temporary, not accidental, deliberate. A narrow staircase led down, worn, used often. That detail alone said everything. This wasn't hidden storage. This was a place people lived. Turner descended first, slowly. Each step carrying weight, not just physical, but understanding. The air grew colder, thicker, harder to breathe, and then he reached the bottom. At first, his eyes struggled to adjust. Then shapes formed, figures, small, still, and then movement. 47 children packed into a space that was never meant to hold them. Some sitting, some lying against the walls, some too weak to move at all. Every single one watching, but not like children, not with curiosity, not with fear alone. With something else, conditioning, a kind of awareness that didn't belong at that age. Turner stopped at the bottom step because the reality hit all at once. This wasn't neglect, this wasn't abandonment, this was control, systematic, deliberate, sustained. Easy, he said quietly, not to calm them but to steady himself. Deputy Harris followed behind him, and when he saw it, he froze. God, he whispered, because there was no other word. Turner moved forward slowly, careful not to startle anyone, but the children didn't react the way he expected. They didn't rush toward him, didn't cry out for help, didn't move. They stayed exactly where they were, watching as if they had been trained not to respond. That was the most unsettling part, not just that they were there, but how they behaved. How long? Harris started but couldn't finish. Turner didn't answer, because the answer was already clear. Years. This had been happening for years. He approached one of the older children, a girl, thin, eyes sharp despite everything. "How long have you been here?" he asked. She looked at him, studied him, then answered, "We're not allowed to say." The words were quiet, but controlled, memorized. Turner felt something shift, because that wasn't fear speaking, that was instruction. "Who told you that?" he asked. The girl didn't hesitate. "Mother," she said, the same name, the same answer, given without question. Turner stood up slowly, looked around the room again, at the conditions, at the structure, at the system, and realized something worse. This wasn't just imprisonment. This was organization, food storage, sleeping areas, control points, everything arranged to maintain order, even here, even underground. "Get them out," Turner said, his voice firmer now. "Carefully." Harris nodded, moved toward the nearest child, knelt down. "It's all right," he said. "You're safe now." But the child didn't move, didn't respond. Just watched him, confused, not by fear, but by the concept of being free. Turner understood it immediately, because when someone has been controlled long enough, freedom doesn't feel real. It feels unfamiliar, uncertain. He turned toward the stairs. "Bring blankets," he called out. "Food, water, everything." The men above moved quickly, because now there was no doubt left, no explanation that could soften this, no version of the story that made it acceptable. This was something else. Something that should have been impossible. And yet it had been happening right beneath their feet for years, and no one had seen it, or worse, no one had chosen to look. The moment the first child was brought upstairs, everything changed. The illusion was gone. There was no returning to normal, no explanation that could contain what had been found. Only one question remained: how had this been allowed to exist? Turner stepped back into the main room. The house felt different now, smaller, exposed. Like the truth had stripped something away. Constance Sullivan stood exactly where he had left her, not pacing, not panicking, waiting. That was the part that unsettled him the most, because nothing in her posture suggested surprise or fear, just awareness. "You knew we would find it," Turner said, not a question, a statement. Constance looked at him. "Yes," she replied. The answer came without hesitation, without emotion, as if this moment had already been accounted for. Turner took a step closer. "How long?" he asked. Constance didn't look away. Long enough, she said. That wasn't an answer, but it was the truth she chose to give. Turner's voice hardened. You've been keeping children locked under this house. Still no reaction. No, she said, a pause. I've been keeping them alive. That was the first real shift, because it reframed everything, not as denial, as belief. Turner stared at her. You call that living? He asked. Constance tilted her head slightly. You're looking at it from the outside, she said. Of course you don't understand. That calm certainty was what made it dangerous, because she wasn't defending herself. She was explaining something she believed was necessary. They were abandoned, she continued, left to die, forgotten by families who couldn't keep them alive. Another pause. I gave them structure. Turner shook his head. You took their freedom, he said. Constance didn't disagree. Yes, she said, and because of that, they survived. The logic was simple, disturbingly simple, and that's what made it effective. Turner stepped closer again. You don't get to decide that, he said. Constance's expression shifted slightly, not anger, recognition. Someone always does, she replied, a pause. Most people just don't admit it. Silence filled the room, because there was truth in that statement, twisted but real. You built a system, Turner said. Yes. You controlled everything. Yes. And you think that makes you right. Constance held his gaze. No, she said, another pause. I think it makes me necessary. There it was again, not morality, necessity. That was the foundation of everything she had done. Turner looked around the room, at the house, at the structure, at the carefully maintained illusion, and then back at her. This ends now, he said. For the first time, something shifted in her expression, not fear, something closer to disappointment. You think this ends because you found it? She asked. Turner didn't respond. You don't understand what you've interrupted, she continued. This was stable, controlled, predictable. And now, she gestured slightly toward the cellar. You've broken that. Turner stepped forward. No, he said, you broke it a long time ago. That was the moment the conversation ended, because now there was nothing left to argue, only consequences. Behind them, more children were being brought upstairs, wrapped in blankets, given water, some still silent. Some beginning to react, some crying for the first time. The reality of what had been done was no longer contained. It was visible, and once something like that becomes visible, it can't be controlled anymore. Turner signaled to his men. Secure the house, he said. Don't let anyone leave. Constance didn't resist, didn't run, didn't argue. She just stood there, watching everything unfold, as if she already understood how it would end. By nightfall, the house was no longer quiet. Where there had once been silence, there was movement, voices, urgency. The sound of something hidden finally brought into the open. The children were taken out in groups, carefully, one by one. Some could walk, others had to be carried, blankets wrapped around shoulders that had known nothing but cold, water given to hands that didn't quite understand what to do with it. And still many of them remained quiet, not because they weren't afraid, but because fear had been replaced by something else: structure, routine, control, and without it, they didn't know how to respond. That was the part no one had prepared for. Freedom isn't always relief. Sometimes it's confusion. The Sullivan house was secured, every room searched, every hidden space uncovered. What they found only confirmed what Turner already understood: records, supplies, systems, everything organized, nothing accidental. And at the center of it, Constance Sullivan. She was taken into custody without resistance. No struggle. No attempt to escape. Just compliance, as if this outcome had always been part of the equation. When they questioned her, she answered. Not defensively, not emotionally, clearly, directly. She explained how it began, one child, then another, each one taken in under the same justification. They needed help, they needed care, and over time that justification became something else. A system. A structure she believed was more reliable than the outside world, more predictable, more controlled. And in her mind, more effective. She didn't see herself as cruel, she saw herself as necessary. That was the part no one could fully understand, because it wasn't madness, it was logic without empathy, and that made it harder to explain. The official investigation lasted months. Statements were taken, records examined, witnesses questioned. But even with all of that, there were gaps, unanswered questions, details that didn't fully connect. Because systems like this don't leave clean explanations behind, they leave fragments. The children were relocated, given care, given time, but recovery wasn't immediate. Because what they had lived through wasn't something that simply disappears. It reshapes how you see the world, how you trust, how you respond. And for many of them, that change stayed. As for Constance, her story ended quietly. No public trial, no widespread record, just documentation filed away, sealed, and eventually forgot, or at least intentionally left behind. The house itself didn't survive long. Months after the investigation, it burned, no clear cause, no confirmed explanation. By morning, nothing remained, no structure, no evidence, just ash and land that looked like nothing had ever happened there. Years passed. The town rebuilt. New families moved in. New routines formed, and slowly the story faded, not completely, but enough. Because people don't hold on to things that challenge their sense of safety. They let them go, or they choose not to look too closely. But sometimes stories like this don't disappear. They change form, they become questions, unanswered, unresolved. And one question remained long after everything else had been buried. Not about what happened, but about how it happened. How something so controlled, so deliberate could exist for so long without being seen, because the truth is it wasn't invisible. It was ignored, and that difference matters because if something like that could exist once, it can exist again. Not loudly, not obviously, but quietly, carefully, just within the limits of what people are willing to question, and that's what makes it dangerous. Because by the time it becomes visible, it's already been there for years, waiting just beneath the surface.